What is going on, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Ride. I'm your host, Jeff Hartman, on this Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning podcast. It is Monday. Happy Monday. We have a game to talk about. We've got a game to break down. We've got a lot to decipher. And this is, as always, brought to you by the SteelCurtainNetwork.com, a Steel Curtain Network podcast network, as well as the Fans First Sports Network. Thank you all for tuning in. If you're wondering, okay, I'm ready for Jeff's winners and losers. They played on Saturday. Where is it? That was yesterday. Go back to Sunday's podcast. It was a shorter show, just the winners and losers. Go check it out. You can also go to SteelCurtainNetwork.com. Check out the article. The podcast is at the bottom of that article. So we are not going to be talking winners and losers in this podcast. In the second half of the show, we're going to update the latest news on the team. We're going to update our DEFCON levels. But here in the first half of the podcast, we're going to talk about what we learned about the Steelers after the win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I understand there's a lot of people out there, a lot of people listening right now, that might say, Jeff, you can't learn anything from the preseason. Nothing. There's nothing that we can glean from these preseason games. And I understand that. I understand that methodology, that thought process. But I think there are some things that we can glean from the Steelers, not just after week one of the preseason, but any preseason game. But I do have to remind everyone out there, before we talk about potential positives or even potential negatives, if you listen to the winners and losers, there's both on both sides of the docket. I do want to remind you what I like to call the preseason in the National Football League, and that is the grain of salt season. Take everything that you see with a grain of salt. So in other words, I always think of two things when I think of things that went really, really well for the Steelers in different ways, but they didn't turn out into regular season success. The first would be that pristine preseason of 2023. Talked about it before on this podcast, on other podcasts. Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, that offense, every time they stepped on the football field, it equated in a touchdown during the preseason. I drank the Kool-Aid. I talked with Jeremy Jerome Betts on Friday. He drank the Kool-Aid. We all were drinking the Kool-Aid. And you know what? I know we weren't alone. But what happened in week one? The San Francisco 49ers came into town, and the Steeler fans, myself included, thought, I think this team can give them a run for their money. And I think this team could maybe surprise some people here. It reminded me of 2021 when TJ Watt just signed his deal and they go to Buffalo and they win, but instead it was at home. They got their doors blown off. And what you saw was when defenses weren't running their vanilla defensive schemes, and it wasn't very elementary for the quarterback and the coordinator to know what to do and how to break everything down, well, it was combustible, and it didn't work out. Did equate to Mason Rudolph coming in at the end of the season in 2023, winning 3 straight games, getting him to the playoffs, but still, you know what I'm talking about. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Don't drink that Kool-Aid. The other player, and this is an individual player, I always think about like a Tuzar Skipper preseason. If you remember when Tuzar Skipper, undrafted player, comes in and looks like he's being shot out of a cannon. Sack after sack after sack. I might even go as far, and I don't even think they keep these stats, or if they do, they shouldn't. But if they did, he might be at the top of the all-time preseason sack list. Maybe the most sacks in a preseason or something like that. Tuzar Skipper, I mean, we were all enamored with him. Did he turn into anything other than maybe a special teams player, a guy that got bumped off the roster, got picked off the practice squad, bounced around the league, little journeyman action? He came back to Pittsburgh. It didn't work out. That success there did not equate to success. Now, there's also been times where the Steelers, like the offensive line, has not looked good in the preseason. They couldn't open up holes. There's times where the passing unit hasn't looked great. They can't move the ball through the air. And then when the regular season comes around and they're actually game planning, they're actually putting some thought and energy into those plans, things change. You have to take both positives and negatives with a grain of salt. So with all of that said, what did we learn from the first preseason game? That's a natural question. So Jeff, the Steelers go down to Jacksonville. They beat the Jaguars 31-25. It was a fun game to watch, a lot of scoring. What exactly can we learn? Well, let's break it down. These are the categories I think we could use for all preseason games. First, and I have this first for a reason, is health. Health. Even when you're talking about the depth of the team, the fringe players, you want them to have full health. You don't want this team's depth to be decimated. You don't want the final 3 players in the 53-man roster to be selected almost because there's no one else available. You want to have the best players available, and they need to be at good health. And when you hear Mike Tomlin, after the game, meet with the media very briefly, and he says, we escaped this game relatively healthy. Cameron McCutcheon, defensive back, he suffered a soft tissue or a hamstring strain. He doesn't think it's serious. That was it. Like that's awesome. There's no other big-time injuries. You can definitely take that away from a preseason game. Win or lose, if you can escape that game without any major injuries, that is a huge positive and something we can definitely glean from. Now let's go to the next category, which would be specific individual performances. This is something that we can also take a look at. When you're talking about a group like the offensive line, as a collective, I think sometimes it's difficult to gauge, considering teams may have their starters in for only a certain number of plays or drives, whatever, if they play at all. Like Isaac Seumalo did not play at all in the game on Saturday night. But that doesn't mean that you can't look at a specific player. Let's use Broderick Jones as an example and say, how did he perform individually during his time in the game in the preseason? But keep this in mind. Football, we know this, is the ultimate team game. So if you take a look at the offensive line, and let's say, and this happened with the Steelers, the offensive line, the starters, the 4 starters that were in there, played only 2 drives, 2 series, if you want to call it that. So if you're going to evaluate the offensive line during that time, sure. But when you look at Caleb Johnson, a 3rd-round running back, and he didn't look great at times, but you also have to wonder, this guy's running behind now the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th string offensive lines. So can you evaluate Caleb Johnson if he's not running behind the offensive line that'll be blocking for him in the regular season? It's difficult to do. You absolutely can see, did he miss a hole? Did he miss assignment? Did he pick up a blitz? Did he not? But ultimately, looking at the grand scope of a statistical stat line, that's tough. That's really difficult to do. You can take specific individual performances. You can learn from those. Things like effort. In the 4th quarter, you saw some Steelers defensive backs on one drive making business decisions on making a tackle. They're like, yeah, not too keen on that idea, and they would just kind of back away and not make the tackle. So it's one of those situations, specific individual performances. Yes, you can take a look at some of those individual performances. The next category, and things that you can learn from, and this is still true for the Steelers on both sides of the football, is play calling. We saw Arthur Smith provide us, the fan base, with a different look of a different offense than what we saw in all of 2024. And if you disagree with me, I'm not sure if we watched the same game. What you saw with Justin Fields and or Russell Wilson at quarterback was not what we saw with Mason Rudolph or Skylar Thompson. You saw in 2025 and on Saturday night, that is the Arthur Smith offense. If you're ever wondering, what is the Arthur Smith offense? In terms of the passing game, it's that. A good mixture of under center and shotgun. A good mixture of play action passes and obviously the zone concept running scheme, but he wants to get the quarterback in positions where he can make easy reads, easy plays for the offensive line. Let's move the football in chunks. And lastly, this is something we didn't see last year, chunk plays over the middle of the field, plays that are designed to open up the middle of the field. You saw chunk plays to Roman Wilson. You saw a chunk play to Scotty Miller. There were others. 16 receivers caught passes in the game Saturday night. So I think that you can see a big change. And remember, this is the vanilla offense, but the play calling, the offensive scheme, the premise behind those decisions definitely are something you can glean from. Defensively, it's difficult. There were really no starters that played any significant amount of time on the defensive side of the ball. Juan Thornhill might have been the closest that you get, but they're not running anything exotic. They're not moving anyone around. It is, we're just going to line up in our basic zone, cover 2, cover 1, 1 high safety, 2 high safeties. We're not blitzing a lot. We're just going to send our front, see if we can get home. That's all it was. So you can't learn too much from the defensive side of the ball, but offensively, Steeler fans can learn a lot from what they decided to work on and really focus and have an emphasis on Saturday night against the Jaguars. The next category and the next thing you can definitely learn from the Steelers is situational football. You saw success and failure in both of these categories. I saw a 3rd and 4 where Caleb Johnson got the ball and actually converted a first down. He ran hard right through the tackles, pushing his way. Beautiful play. Situational football. I saw the Steelers in a 2-minute drive situation to start the end of the first half, where Skylar Thompson gets the offense. They have 3 timeouts remaining. They think they only had to use one of them as they go down. Max Hurlman is the one that gets the touchdown in the right flat. He does a backflip. It's awesome. That was a great 2-minute drive. They only had to use one timeout. Situational football. We also saw the Steelers get the football to start the second half, third quarter. They're moving the ball. They're facing a 4th and 1, and Mike Tomlin decides to go for it. Puts Caleb Johnson into the game. Trey Sermon had been the running back leading up to that. Puts Caleb Johnson into the game. Johnson gets the handoff. He does not run hard up the middle. He tries to bounce it outside. Not going to work in the National Football League. Gets tripped up, loss of downs, turnover on downs. So the situational football, you can start to figure some things out. Defensively, the Steelers' red zone defense was, I thought, very good in this game. I thought they did a tremendous job standing tall when it mattered the most. Now, granted, Jacksonville finishes with 2 for 3 in terms of red zone success, but when the Steelers' defense, when they knew that the field behind them was getting short, they were able to stand tall and force a field goal. Situational football matters. 3rd down conversions on defense are going to need some work, but again, very vanilla. 3rd down offense was very good for the Steelers. They did a good job moving the chains. They were honestly very efficient, 8 for 13 on 3rd downs offensively. The Jaguars, 3 for 10. It all comes down to situational football, and that's one more thing that we can look at in terms of what we can learn from a preseason game. Lastly, a clean brand of football and or penalties. Mike Tomlin said they only got penalized one time with a pre-snap penalty, and this is factual. They did have some other penalties, but still, you're never going to expect 0 penalties. You just hope they're not the idiotic variety. Darnell Washington catching a touchdown, dunking the ball over the crossbar, draws a 15-yard penalty, and now all of a sudden Ben Sauls is kicking a 48-yard extra point instead of the standard extra point. Those are the things that it's a preseason, you can laugh it off and okay, whatever, but you can't do that when the games count. That cannot happen when the games count. But the Steelers did play a clean brand of football. You saw them pretty buttoned up. You saw them making more tackles than they missed. You saw them having good, sound assignment football. It doesn't mean it was perfect. Beanie Bishop got very fortunate on 2 occasions where the ball was either underthrown when he was already been beaten in trail position. You saw Beanie Bishop be fortunate that a player drops a pass instead of catching it. There are situations like that are not perfect, but at the same time, you can look at it as a whole for the entire team. I thought it was a step in the right direction. So when you look at those 5 categories, the health of the team after the game, specific individual performances, play calling, situational football, and then penalties and or a clean brand of football, all those things are what we can learn from the Steelers even after a preseason game. So if you're someone that says, I know they did a good job. They scored 31 points. That's fantastic, but we can't learn too much about the Steelers. I have to disagree. Can we learn enough that we're going to be able to predict or project into the regular season? No. But these players that are playing, they will have a role on the team. Maybe it's a quarterback 3. Maybe it's a wide receiver who's going to be signed to the practice squad. Maybe it's a tight end, running back, fullback like Max Hurlman who could be potentially on the roster if things fall his way. These things matter. Special teams plays matter. So when I was watching the kick coverage teams, both punt and kickoff, and I see Carson Bruner come up with 2 big tackles, that's something I notice. That is an individual performance that we talked about. I saw Sebastian Castro with the special teams tackle. If these guys want to make the team, those are the type of plays they need to make. Therefore, that's why you can learn something from the Pittsburgh Steelers preseason game in week 1.